You are those people who dared to take up arms to support the various defense and security forces, to fight to reclaim our lands. Not everyone is allowed to do this, but you decided to take up arms and face it. Today, Burkina is facing its destiny. It's truly a matter of very existence indeed. And at these crucial moments, indeed, we cannot finish paying tribute to you. We cannot finish magnifying you. We cannot finish glorifying you.
Faso is not just defending itself anymore. It's inventing the battlefield. Under Captain Traore, this once overlooked Sahelian nation has launched a classified series of military operations, drone engineering platforms, and counter-insurgency tech labs that have redefined what a sovereign army can look like in the 21st century. And not one of these projects was meant to be seen. But today, we're exposing all 10. Here's the brutal truth. While international media mocked Burkina Faso's poverty and preached democracy, Traore was quietly converting the nation into a technological fortress. Not with help from NATO, not with UN blue helmets, but with local minds, wartime urgency, and a blueprint the West never wanted the Sahel to have. This isn't about upgrading rifles. This is about deploying tactical drones over 3 borders in one night. About intercepting French surveillance in real time. About building a military doctrine that fuses indigenous knowledge with 5th-generation warfare principles. And the question is, how did it happen? How did a country the IMF once dismissed as aid-dependent become the region's fastest-growing drone command base? How did Traore flip sanctions into a weapons lab? And why are American think tanks now quietly studying Burkina Faso's battlefield autonomy models? Let's find out. If you're ready to see how Africa's new military blueprints are being drawn in the red sands of rebellion, hit like, subscribe, and stay locked. Because when a tomato became a weapon of sovereignty, we looked twice. But when drones started taking off from Burkina Faso soil, the whole empire turned its satellites. Let's find out what they saw next. Faso didn't start this war on its own terms. It inherited it. Decades before Captain Traore stepped into military command. This land was already dismembered by outsourced security contracts, surveillance dependency, and foreign, trained insurgents. While the West gave speeches in Geneva, rebels crept across open borders. While French troops lounged in air-conditioned bases, villages burned. And every time Ouagadougou requested arms to defend its people, the reply was the same: not until you reform. Not until elections. Not until we finish our assessment. But Burkina Faso was bleeding now, and bleeding wasn't on the schedule. Border towns like Djibo, Aribenda, and Saitenga became target practice for insurgent militias. Villagers were massacred for refusing to abandon their land. Yet humanitarian drones, donated by Western NGOs, filmed the aftermath instead of stopping it. This wasn't neglect. This was structural warfare by delay. France claimed to fight terror, but they never gave Ouagadougou the power to fight alone. They gave speeches, not sovereignty, talks, not tools. And so, by 2022, Burkina Faso's security map looked like a throat lined with knives. Almost every northern and eastern corridor was listed as ungovernable by international observers. Defense patrols were denied air cover, and aerial reconnaissance, still fully reliant on foreign satellites that could be turned off at any time. But the empire made a fatal miscalculation. It assumed no one in the Sahel could build. That's when Traore flipped the script. The first shock came quietly. One early morning, foreign intelligence noted unfamiliar aircraft patterns across the Liptako-Gourma region. They weren't UN crafts. They weren't French Air Force either. They were Turkish, but they weren't flown by Turks. Project 1. Bayraktar TB2 drones, silent, high-altitude UCAVs with surgical strike capacity, now in Burkina Faso hands. This wasn't an imported solution. This was a deployment led by local command. Burkina Faso wasn't borrowing defense. It was operating it. Within weeks, remote insurgent camps near the Mali border went dark. Convoys were neutralized mid-movement. And for the first time, Traoré's military had eyes, without Paris watching, but just as foreign analysts were adjusting their threat maps, the second blow came. Project 2. Bayraktar Akinci drones, longer range, heavier payload, and equipped with dual AI target acquisition systems. One Akinci unit could monitor 3 provinces in a single night. It didn't just watch. It intercepted, tracked, and eliminated. And both drones were flown from inside Burkina Faso. Not leased, not stationed, operated. That meant Ouagadougou no longer needed ECOWAS permission for intelligence, no longer relied on France to confirm threats before acting, no longer had to choose between national security and diplomatic approval. Together, the TB2 and Akinci platforms changed the tempo of war, not by shifting firepower, but by shattering dependency, because surveillance is not neutral, it's political, and whoever controls the drone controls the narrative. But here's the real disruption. These 2 aircraft were only the beginning. They didn't exist in isolation. They were feeding into a deeper strategy, one that involved not just foreign machines, but domestic mastery. And the next phase of that strategy is where the real sovereignty began. Because the next 2 projects didn't come in crates. They came from Burkina Faso hands, the rest of the system. The part that made this more than a drone purchase. The part that made it a national doctrine. That's what we In most countries, buying drones is procurement. In Burkina Faso, it became a philosophy, because after Bayraktar TB2 drones started conducting high-altitude strike operations, and Project 2, Bayraktar Akinci drones expanded the battlefield beyond enemy prediction, Captain Traore didn't pause to celebrate. He doubled down. He knew that sovereignty doesn't come from imported firepower. It comes from mastering the sky on your own terms. That's why he launched Project 3, National Drone Training Center. Not a symbolic gesture, but a pipeline feeding the future with Burkina Faso minds. Built quietly on reclaimed military land near Ouagadougou, the center now trains hundreds of new recruits. Not just to fly, but to think militarily. To outmaneuver NATO-trained insurgents, to decode patterns of movement, and to fire only when needed, but always with precision. Graduates of the center no longer ask where the enemy is. They calculate where the enemy will be. This isn't training, it's indoctrination into a new kind of national thinking. But Traore knew this, a drone pilot without local drones is still dependent. So he greenlit Project 4, Indigenous Drone Assembly, a once unthinkable ambition, now fully operational. Today, in hangars shielded from satellite eyes, Burkina Faso engineers are assembling UAVs tailored for the Sahel, with shock-resistant bodies, sensor suits adapted to arid dust winds, and locally developed software that resists foreign jamming attempts. This isn't just a technical upgrade, it's an ideological rupture. Because every rivet, every circuit, every line of code says one thing: we'll build what we need. And we don't wait for permission. Village boys once tasked with herding goats are now guiding armed drones over enemy forests. Local coders, trained in open source warfare tools, are now encrypting mission protocols in native dialects. And every flight launched from these assembly lines writes a silent paragraph in the doctrine of national rebirth. Together, these 4 projects, Bayraktar TB2 drones, Akinci drones, the National Drone Training Center, and Indigenous Drone Assembly, have formed the skeleton of something foreign analysts now whisper about as the Traore grid, a military ecosystem that doesn't rely on American boots, French logistics, or UN support missions, that never deploy to the red zones. Now Burkina Faso calculates its strikes in-house, trains its operators in its own language, and builds machines designed by those who bleed when mistakes are made. War is never just fought on the battlefield. It's fought in how you build homes. In whether a soldier's family can sleep without mortar blasts. In whether a city's roads are strong enough to carry tanks and hope. In the old Burkina Faso, roads were for trucks. Hospitals were for waiting, and soldiers deployed to red zones had to pray more than plan. Because there was no structure, no rear base, no logistical chain that could guarantee them a return trip. But Traore didn't just see buildings. He saw weaknesses. And he understood that if an insurgent can hide behind a crumbling clinic wall, then architecture has failed the revolution. That's why he shifted from drone skies to ground steel. The revolution needed armor. So he launched Project 5. Secret drone base, not a single base, but a network of low-visibility drone command hubs carved into rural zones around Ouagadougou. Disguised under civilian infrastructure, but wired into a full-spectrum combat system. Each base is linked to encrypted comms, equipped with underground hangars, and designed to scramble drone strikes within minutes. Anywhere in the country. French surveillance drones have flown overhead and seen nothing, because this isn't a base you look for. It's a base you feel. After it's too late. From these hidden nodes, Burkina Faso drone pilots launch missions that intercept mercenary convoys, map insurgent hideouts, and reroute support to vulnerable villages. Before an attack even happens. It's not just the enemy who's being watched. It's the battlefield itself that's learning. But even the smartest system needs people on the ground. So Traore activated Project 6, Volunteer Defense Force, VDP, not just a civilian militia, but a living extension of the drone grid. Equipped with rugged communication tools, body-worn transmitters, and locally made battlefield tablets linked to command centers, these volunteers don't just hold rifles. They hold data. They walk the villages. Map enemy movement with hand-sketched overlays. Translate drone heat signatures into real-time ground reports. And, when necessary, call in fire from above. Some are farmers. Some are former schoolteachers. All are patriots. They've been trained to navigate both digital systems and dense forest paths. To recognize European-grade munitions. To capture, not kill, when possible. Because intelligence is the new ammunition. And while ECOWAS debates what sovereignty means, the VDP are defining it. With every checkpoint they hold, every ambush they reroute, every child they keep from being abducted into chaos. Together, the secret drone base and the Volunteer Defense Force have restructured the nation's war geography. No longer a flat map of red zones and safe zones. Now it's a lattice of dynamic response corridors, where drone intelligence meets ground courage, where no village is abandoned, and no ambush is left unanswered. But here's the part that foreign analysts still don't understand. These are not just military projects. When a drone strikes, you see the explosion, but you never see the code that guided it, the command string, the server call, the encryption sequence that kept it invisible to foreign interception. That's the real battlefield. And that's where Captain Traoré turned next. Because after establishing tactical air power with the Bayraktar TB2 drones, extending deep strikes with Bayraktar Akinci drones, training elite pilots at the National Drone Training Center, and assembling custom UAVs from the indigenous drone assembly, he knew it wasn't enough to build hardware. You have to protect the signal. And to protect the signal, you need mobility, firepower, and intelligence in motion. So Traoré launched Project 7, the Modern Armored Vehicles program, not parade gear, not rusting trucks with flags on the side. These are imported Ajda Yalchon units, Cobra tactical vehicles, and retrofitted MAPs built for asymmetric warfare in the Sahel. Mines don't stop them. IEDs barely dent them. And when insurgents try to cut off convoys, these vehicles don't retreat. They reroute and strike from behind. Equipped with mounted turrets, thermal vision, and encrypted communication suites patched into the drone grid, they act as the moving fists of the Traore doctrine. Able to roll from drone base to drone base, recover downed UAVs, deploy Project 60 Volunteer Defense Force, VDP's squads into hostile zones, and extract survivors before foreign NGOs even hear a whisper of the attack. But mobility is useless without reach. That's why Captain Traoré greenlit Project 8, attack helicopters and aircraft program, Mi-35 helicopters, flying tanks, MiG-17s, fast insertion and medevac platforms, and Embraer light attack aircraft, ideal for insurgent warfare, cheap to operate, deadly to encounter. Some were acquired through barter. Some arrived with barely functioning parts. But within months, Burkina Faso's mechanics had rebuilt them into airborne hammers. Now, insurgent columns that once rode motorcycles unchallenged through rural terrain find themselves pinned from above. Stalked by helicopter eyes, cut off by fast, moving jets that trace their path from 10 kilometers out. These aircraft don't just hit targets. They send a message. Burkina Faso doesn't need permission to dominate its airspace anymore. But this is the part they don't want you to see. Behind every successful drone strike, every coordinated VDP ambush, every surgical armored deployment, and aerial reinforcement, there is a nervous system. And Traore knew that if that nervous system relied on foreign tech, it would eventually betray him. That's why the coming project didn't need missiles. It needed motherboards. And it's why the entire war effort was quietly routed through one of the most classified facilities in the country, buried deeper than the drone bases, harder to locate than the UAV hangars, and protected not by walls, but by firewalls. Because the next project isn't a machine. It's a map made of light. A chamber of secrets where no foreign power can see in, and no command leaks out. The foreign think tanks never predicted this. From the first drone launch to the last encrypted server powered on, this wasn't a weapons program. It was a nation building blueprint disguised as war. Because when the Bayraktar TB2 drones first carved sky paths over enemy territory, when the Bayraktar Akinci drones charted beyond Burkina Faso's borders, when the modern armored vehicles roared across insurgent, held supply routes, and when the attack helicopters and aircraft dropped elite units with mathematical precision. It wasn't about defense. It was declaration. Burkina Faso was no longer applying for sovereignty. It was enforcing it. But behind all that, there was something else growing, quietly. Not visible on military broadcast footage, not paraded during Independence Day flyovers. It was the infrastructure that made it all work. That's why Traore launched Project 9, National Cyber and Data Infrastructure. This wasn't just server space. It was digital sovereignty. Deep beneath civilian administrative zones, military-grade data centers were erected, built to withstand sabotage, fitted with fail-safe environmental controls, and powered by hybrid off-grid energy, inside custom encrypted communication protocols, locally hosted UAV flight logs, real-time command relay systems, and firewalled databases immune to foreign backdoors. For the first time in Sahelian history, a military force could operate autonomously from its own cloud infrastructure. No more leaked cables, no more intercepted troop movement logs, no more begging for satellite access from Western defense partners. Every byte processed inside these centers was a byte stolen back from foreign control, and it terrified the empire, because it meant Burkina Faso no longer needed to be told who to fight, or how to defend itself, or where to station its soldiers. It could think, act, and retaliate digitally, strategically, independently. But all of this needed teeth, a last shield, a training doctrine built not just on tactics but on post-colonial clarity. Which is why the final operation came into play, Project 10, the Russian alliance, known inside as the Bear Brigade. To the outside world, it looked like mere cooperation. But on the ground, it was a transformation. Specialist trainers, hardened by Chechnya, Syria, and Donbas, entered Burkina Faso not to command, but to transfer hard lessons learned from centuries of imperial warfare. Burkinabe units learned rapid counter-offensive tactics, urban warfare adaptation, electronic disruption maneuvers, and psychological battlefield conditioning. In joint simulations, they practiced scenarios the French never taught. What to do when aid is cut mid-battle, how to spot sabotage inside NGO shipments, how to decapitate insurgent leadership in under 48 hours, and most crucially, how to defend a sovereign state not just with firepower, but with doctrine. The Bear Brigade wasn't a gimmick. It was a seal, a signal to the West. Burkina Faso has allies who don't lecture, but train. Now, when drones lift from covert bases, when Project 6, Volunteer Defense Force of VDP units coordinate via secure apps, when TB2 squadrons re-enter the grid from recon flights, It's all part of a unified warfare doctrine. They call it the Traore grid in whispers. But to the people of Burkina Faso, it's called survival. Because from dust runways to encrypted cores, from indigenous UAVs to armored convoys, from the cyber lattice to the last bullet in a volunteer's vest, everything was built without begging. Everything was coded without colonizer input. Everything was learned in fire. So let the world ask, is Burkina Faso a drone superpower now? The real question is, how did a country under sanctions build an army the West can't predict? And why do neighboring states now call Ouagadougou before they call Paris? Because what Traore built wasn't just 10 military projects. It was a new Sahelian identity, forged in blackout zones, coded in silence, and launched, without warning, into the skies. The doctrine lives, and now it's spreading. Comment your country below if you think it's time to adopt this model. Share this video if you believe sovereignty